God, we shall all be moved. Ready or not, here we come, getting down on the one which we believe in. Can I get it on my good foot? Good God. I'm trying to get down one time. Nothing can stop us now. Hey, don't tell me now. What you're fucking for? You don't tell me now.
It was an exciting experience from day one. As a matter of fact, when I first entered the management training program at RCA Victor in Des Plaines, Illinois, it was fun from the very beginning, and on throughout my entire 50-year career. It was just enjoyable. I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, which is a music town, but I never had any interest in music at all, none whatsoever. And just a coincidence that I ended up in a management training program at RCA Victor Distributing Corps. And in that training program, I ended up in the record division. And once I started working in the record division, I knew that this was my love. And that's when I started working with some product from Elvis Presley, who was a homeboy at that particular time. Also, Sam Cooke. That was the beginning. And from there, it just exploded. Well, it was my passion for music, and I love working with people. And I met so many interesting artists. I mentioned one in particular, Cannonball Adderley, an interesting guy. Another guy that I enjoyed working with, Lou Rawls. I enjoyed working with Santana. I mean, it was just an exciting time. And every artist that I worked with, I enjoyed it.
So how did the move to CBS come about?
Well, I was working for Mercury Records in Chicago. And I received a call from Clive Davis in New York. And you get a call from Clive Davis, you stop everything. So I flew into New York. I met with Clive Davis and Bruce Lundvall, and they were telling me about what they wanted to do in terms of black music. And once I became convinced that they were serious about what they were doing, I immediately accepted the position. And that was in November of 1970. That's when I started with, of 71 rather, November of 71. That's when I started with CBS Records in New York City. And that really was the beginning of an even more fabulous time and career. And it was my assignment to form a black marketing division. That's what it was called at that particular time. That was the very beginning of it for all of your major record labels. I formed a black marketing division, and I started out with 12 individuals. As a matter of fact, the book that I have out right now, the Harvard Report, it talks about those 12 individuals that started at the very beginning. Now, our mission was to penetrate and to dominate the black music business. And in a very, very short time, we did it. CBS started out with less than 6 black acts. And at the demise of the black music marketing division, they had more than 300 black acts. So it was most successful.
What were the sort of acts that you were signing and why?
Well, I would say the first major signing was a deal that was made with Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff with Philadelphia International. And of course, they started out with the OGs, the Backstabbers. And then behind that came Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, if you don't know me by now. And then behind that came Billy Paul, Me and Mrs. Jones. And then the hits just kept coming and coming and coming. And one of the interesting projects that I really enjoyed working on was that when we did the Soul Train theme, the TSOP, the sound of Philadelphia. Well, what happened there? Don Cornelius really did not know Kenny Gamble. But Don and I were very, very good friends from our Chicago days. He flew into New York he and I got together and we took a train down to Philadelphia. And I paired him with Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff. And I took off. And they in turn came up with that tune, TSOP, the sound of Philadelphia, which became the Soul Train theme. Now, basically it was a Soul Train theme, but it wasn't named that. Kenny Gamble suggested to Don, why do we call this the Soul Train theme? But Don Cornelius said, no, I'm not going to do that. So consequently, later on, he wished that he had, because it became so successful, the Soul Train theme. But that's the way that came about. And then behind them came the Isley Brothers. They came over with that mighty machine. And again, hit after hit after hit. And then, of course, eventually that led on to not the acquisition of it, but the deal that was made with Stax Records for distribution. So, I mean, the hits just kept coming. Disco Lady with John Taylor. The hits just kept coming and coming. It was just a fun time.
Despite continued success, Stax couldn't get its records into suburban department stores. So in 1972, not long after Motown sold out to MCA, Al Bell struck a unique deal with Clive Davis at CBS Records. Stax remained independent but gained major label distribution.
CBS dominated every category of music in the entire industry other than black music.
Because of the power of Columbia Records and its branches and everything, that would put us in a position where we could reach the white market. And in the discussions with Clive was explaining to me how he wanted to penetrate deeper into the black market and the black community.
Clive and Al Bell, they both had a dream, and I think they bought into each other's dream. And in their minds, they knew exactly how they could make it work.
Clive Davis became the most powerful man in the music business. His salary and benefits, $350,000 a year. So it was a bombshell when in May of last year, CBS fired Davis.
The charges against Clive Davis stem out of an investigation conducted by United States grand juries here in Newark and in New York.
But unfortunately, when Clive Davis was taken out of the picture, no one else had that vision or that dream at CBS. So consequently, Al Bell was just out there drifting.
Well, at that particular time, there was nothing written about it. Now, I came to CBS with many years of experience. See, I had worked in the street as a salesman. I was the first black salesman at Capitol Records there in Chicago. So I was called a territory salesman, I actually called on retail outlets. And from there, I moved over into the promotion department. Now I'm working directly with radio stations. I was a regional promotion manager. So I was based in Chicago, but I was responsible for the entire Midwest. So I was traveling on a regular basis. So I knew radio, and I knew what people were reacting to. I also knew the local markets. Now we knew what to do, but the idea, can we document it? And that's one of the reasons for getting that Harvard study done, was to document it. And here, years later, I have written a book on the Harvard report that's out there available right now for those that would be interested in finding out what that's all about. But the idea was to document it, and that's exactly what we did.
So what did that report say? What kind of data did it?
Well, the report stated that the black music business, there is a viable market out there for it. The key is exposure. So that's what we were doing. That's one of the things that Harvard report showed us. You got to get it exposed. And interestingly, that led into another thing. You're talking about exposure. Now, on a black record, you can only sell so many records because you can only expose it to just a certain number of people. Now, at that particular time, there was the black radio station, which was called the R&B station, or the white radio station, which was called the Top 40 station. And they didn't cross those lines. You played black records on black radio stations. You played white records on white radio stations. White records meaning those white artists. Now, on a radio dial, a black station in every market throughout the entire country at that particular time was on the right-hand side of the dial, which is the weakest signal. So consequently, you can only reach so many people. Whereas the top 40 station was located in the middle of the dial, which is the strongest signal. So the idea is, how can I cross this record over to pick up that top 40 play? That was the challenge. I would say that was one of my biggest challenges. Now, I went to the top 40 of the pop staff at CBS, and I want to cross these records over. So we're selling 1 million, maybe we can sell 5 million if we cross it over. And they told me, Logan, give me a top 5 records on R&B chart and Billboard, and we'll cross it over. I gave it to them. I gave them a #1 record on the R&B charts, but they never could cross it over. And what happened, I had a local promotion manager. His name was Bill Craig. He was a local promotion manager for Detroit. He was a good friend of a female program director at a top 40 station in Canada, which is just across the river. He persuaded his friend to program that record. She programmed it. It went to #1. And then their sister station in Chicago picked up on it. And then the rest was history. They crossed over throughout the entire country. So that was our means for crossing records over. Now, mind you, now this record is being played on top 40 stations now, as well as R&B stations. It's guaranteed to go gold. Gold meaning when you sell 500,000 units, 500,000 units for an album is gold. 1 million units is gold for a single or 45. Of course, I'm talking old school now, because it's completely different here now. The country was divided. We're talking about the 70s, and we're also talking about the early 80s. But the country was divided in the 70s in particular. There was a black radio station, there was a white radio station. And all the major companies, the few that had dual staffs, they had a black staff and they had a white staff. Mind you now, when I first went to CBS, my guys were only responsible for carrying black records. They didn't carry no top 40 records. I do remember there was a case, I had a friend of mine who worked for MCA, and a black guy, and there was an Elton John record that he crossed over to the black market. So occasionally it did go the reverse. Matter of fact, the record was called Benny and the Jets. That was the record. And my friend crossed that record over there for MCA. So that did happen occasionally, but the lines were drawn. There was the black staff and the pop staff, and you didn't cross those lines.
Was that frustrating for you?
No, it wasn't frustrating, because that's the way things were. And I came from the South. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. So I was fully aware my entire life of how those lines were drawn. So you adjust and deal with it and move around them. That's exactly what happened in that case there with Bill Craig in Detroit. We adjusted, we moved around it, and we were successful. And also another thing that we did on a local basis, we tied in with the local politicians that were running for office. Let's take Detroit for instance. If there's a local politician that's running for office, well, we would tie our artists in with that politician. So at their rallies, we'd make sure that our artists were there to support them and to perform to attract and to draw the crowd. So it was just a layer upon layer upon layer in attracting people to our product, and we did everything that was necessary to do that. Then I got a call from my friend here on the West Coast, a guy named Don Cornelius, and he was getting ready to start his own label called Soul Train Records. He said, Logan, you gotta come with me. So I resigned from CBS International. Then I moved out here to Los Angeles, California, working with Don Cornelius and a guy named Dick Griffin. And then Don Cornelius, it was his company, it was his money, and after about 1.5 years, he decided to close it. So when he closed his company, Dick Griffith formed a company called Solo Records, which is most successful. I formed a company which is called Source Records. And I would say my greatest thrill in the my entire career was forming my own label, which is called Source Records. And once I had formed that label with a distribution deal with MCA Records, and my very first release was on a group called Chuck Brown and the Soul Churches, a tune called Bustin' Loose. First time out of the box, it went gold. And that was the beginning of my label, Source Records.
You had a pretty good track record of getting gold records right out of the box.
Well, I am mentioning the records that went gold. There were some misses all then. And even right now, I'm getting a lot of calls from those guys who are very, very young when I hired them at CBS years ago, and they are telling me about some of the things that I exposed them to and what I showed them when they were just coming in. Even one example, I emphasized to all those guys, you're young, just getting married, buy your house. I emphasized it to all of them. And all of them did, but some of them did. Those guys are calling me right now, thanking me for that kind of advice. And of course, buying a house, things like that, I was always real estate minded anyway, so it was an easy thing for me to really show them how to do that.
In another interview, you referenced a teacher, I think it was, from your high school, who taught you the lesson about you have to run faster, jump higher.
Oh, that was a principal. That was a principal of my high school. That was Professor Blatt T. Hunt. And that was one of the comments he would always make to us as black students. You got to run faster. You've got to jump higher.
One nation under a roof. Get down, just
my name is Dr. Logan H. Westbrooks. And when I found out that I had been named along with my wife in this Angels Walk, especially along the Crenshaw corridor, I was really, really excited. And when I found out about it, I rushed over just to prove to myself. And now that I am over here, it's bringing back so many fond memories. Initially, my wife and I, we made this as an investment when we purchased the Crenshaw Square. And of course, as time went on, we moved on into other things. But while we were here, we had all kinds of tenants that was renting space here, Japanese, Caucasians, black folk, female businesses. We had even a branch of the Jacobian Miles had an office here. We had a huge cleaners on anchoring on one end, on the north end of the complex. And also on the north end, there also was a branch of the Sumitomo Bank. I think it was about a 3-story building, as well as an office building on that end. Now, mind you, it was a perfect setup for an investor. On the second level, there were all offices. And on the ground floor level, there were retail spaces. And ironically, that's really the trend here today. We had a number of different restaurants. We had Korean restaurants. We had Japanese restaurants. All of those were here on the premises. And while we were here, I had a tenant, his name was Avery Clayton, who was a famous artist here on the Los Angeles scene. There were various artists that had set their wares up here on this balcony up here, where we had this choir, this gospel choir that would be singing. So we had those sounds that were going out all over the courtway, and the hundreds of people that were coming through. And they were looking at the artists, they were meeting the artists, they were chatting with the artists, they were buying their goods, they were buying gifts, and it just was a festive occasion. Each Sunday, people were looking forward to this. Again, that logo, Art Show, every sunny Sunday. And that was the logo, every sunny Sunday.
The legacy of history and culture remains in Crenshaw Square, which is also home of the Los Angeles Sentinel, the largest Black-owned newspaper west of the Mississippi. Today, the Sentinel hosts the annual Taste of Soul, attracting 350,000 attendees each year. Spearheaded by Danny Bakewell, the Taste of Soul is the largest street festival in the city and county. Could it be that what is manifested today was inspired by the vision of yesterday?
Come on. One nation under a roof. Get down just for the funk of it. One nation and we're on the move. Stop us now. Yeah. Come on. Gonna give you part of what you're funkin' for. Hey, I think I'm down and out. I got a question.